All right, so yesterday we went through the whole how to get your initial painting started, which means that you have to, paint the ground, which was the yellow we did over. And then while I was off screen, I shaded it. So I used a sepia, which is a dark brown, because a lot of this is going to be yellow. But you can use either that, like mix your brown and black, which would create a darker brown, or you can use just black, but really, really watered down. So it shouldn't have really, really dark, any really, really dark areas. So the first step, like I said before, is just shading it in. Okay, so I shaded this in. It's good to go. Now the next step will be coloring it. So what you do first is I set up on my palette all the little colors that I want to use. Set them up separately because you are going to mix water in with them, and I'll try to make it so you can kind of see my palette so you can see what I'm doing. Take my paintbrush, again, just a dollar store paintbrush, and I'm going to start, I think, with the light blue. The reason it's off screen, so it's down here. There we go, turn. The reason I'm starting with this is I decided that the back of my water, so like all of this is going to actually be like water tones. It was mostly I started doing swirls and I was like, oh, that kind of looks like water. Let's do that. My shading has had a night to dry, which honestly is the very best. You want to, when you're doing the second or the first color tone, you want to make sure that your shading and your ground layer are 100% dry. Otherwise, when you put water on top of them, they're going to start lifting. Now, you'll get a little bit of lift anyway, but that's okay. You just kind of want it all to go through. So if you look, my blue's going on, and it looks like there's almost like a background color, which is exactly what I want to go for. I want to be able to see the shading underneath because it's going to be my guide. And this is just a general area, so I know that I'm going to color blue. The other thing you can do, and I've done before, is use Pigma, so Pigma markers, so very, very fine pens, to color the area beneath so that you can get a more like all-encompassing area. However, you have to make sure it's dry and you have to make sure it's waterproof. If it's not waterproof, what's going to happen is you're going to end up with like an inky mess. So you can use markers to establish your letter, but if you want to paint on top of that black ink, it has to be waterproof black ink and it has to be 100% dry. Otherwise, you're just going to destroy whatever work you've done. So you can see, if you look at this blue area, you'll see that it's actually lifting up some of the sepia when I'm painting over top of it, which is, again, fine. It's not a big deal. You don't want to over-water it. Yeah, one second. So I'm just going to show you this basic area, and then the other area, it'll all come together easily. So what I'm going to do now is you want to paint your basic colors all over everything. All right, so right here, this is going to be my yellow, and this is like the background color. So I'm painting my yellow. I'm not going to paint the entire thing in front of you guys because this is just like a quick tutorial on how to use watercolor. But you use watercolor in layers, okay? So all the colors that you're planning on using, the first layer is usually like very watered down, which we again call a wash. And then you just keep adding layer on top of layer as it dries. So watercolor is almost like a longer process. So the way you work so that it's drying on time is you put one layer down and then you move to a different layer. So you're not constantly like painting on top of the same thing. You just want to paint, put the paint down, and then give that area a second to dry. All right, so ideally, the next step, I'm just going to show you right now, but the next step is like when I would go to the next step, this would have its complete full layer done. So everything here would be painted as per the color I want. So again, I'm going to concentrate on my water because that's the first area. And then to do that, I'm going to take this darker blue and a little bit of this, mix it together, to create my mid-tone. Okay, so now I have a little bit of a darker area, and then I'm going to start going in, and I want to work, for me, over top of some of these areas. Okay, so like this. The shadowed areas. Okay, you don't have to go over everything again. I'm just now going over the areas I want darker, and I can leave the lighter areas to shine with the background color. So that's kind of where I'm at now. And again, this is all personal preference. I'm not really, like, there's no certain area for the background that's supposed to be darker or that's supposed to be lighter. It's all just your own, like, judgment. Do I like this area darker? Do I like this area lighter? What do I want to do with this? So then once I'm done this middle area, okay, ideally again, I would go through this entire thing and it would all be done with the midtone now. So like, for example, the next area I would create the yellow midtone, clean off my brush, and then start going in with the darker yellows that I wanted to use, right? So then that would also get a little bit darker. You go holistically, so you just move around the entire thing and give it all a chance to dry. So this, imagine this is painted, all of this is painted with your mid color. And then the last step that I'm just rushing through to show you, because this is a demo, I don't have to do all of it, is you take your finer brush. So for me, I'm using this brush because it's a little point. And now you're going to use your darkest tone. So I'm going to take this one and I'm going to mix it even with a little bit of this brown because I want that darker tone. Okay, so this is going to be my dark tone. And now this tone goes in just the areas that you want very dark. Okay, so any area you want to highlight or make it very, very dark, that's where this little mid-tone goes, or this darker tone. So obviously the darker one, you're going to use the least, right? You don't want a huge, big, like, dark area because that's just going to look gross and like a giant blob. So make sure that the darkest tone that you use should be the last that goes on your paper. And it also should be the one that you use the least. It's mostly to just create those really dark shadows and to create depth in those certain areas. You don't want to end up using your darkest tone to paint everything. It's almost like just a little touch for those areas that you want to really bring out. Okay, so as you're seeing, I'm just like, I would even take it here and let it go. This is what's happening. So I'm fighting with it right now because I'm painting too quickly on top of it. So my painting is starting to bleed. That's because the paper is too wet. So it wants me to take a break. That's why ideally when I'm doing this, I would move to different areas. So make sure your area is dry before you work back into it. Watercolor is usually like a long process. So that's the basics. So if you look at the previous video, we did ground, and then all of this was my shading. So I did this in sepia, but you can do it in black. Always work from light to dark, and there should be the least dark. And then after you're done your shading layer, you go into your basic colors. So you do like a wash on the areas so that you know what color it's going to be. Then you pick a darker color, like a darker blue or a darker yellow in my case, and you start adding in your midtones. And then the final thing is you're going to use almost your pure pigment, which is the little bit of water, and then you add your darkest areas in. So that's ideally a quick lesson on how you paint with watercolor. Again, wait for it to dry between layers and work on the entire thing. Don't focus on a certain section. Do the entire second layer first, and then just keep adding into it. All right, so that's that. I'm going to stop this, answer the questions that have been building up in the chat, and then I'm going to show you pencil crayons.